Everybody knows about variations and change orders in construction, but 99% of project managers don't understand how to manage them properly, and they end up leaving a ton of money on the table. The reality is, it's incredibly easy to lose money on construction projects, and if you don't handle variations properly, you're almost certainly going to end up in trouble. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the process you can use to handle variations properly and use them to boost your profit margins. So let's start by talking about why variations matter. Variation, or change order as they refer to them in the US, is an adjustment to a lump sum contract. So a lump sum contract is where the contractor takes on the fixed fee risk to deliver the work. Any changes to the scope will result in a change to this fixed fee. Now, everyone talks about how much money contractors make during variations. That's because they're procured non-competitively. When you think about the initial package of works, the initial project scope, that gets tendered to market. 3 to 6 contractors will quote on it, and the client will typically go with the lowest price bid. Once they award the contract, when things start to change, the client can't go back out to 3 to 6 contractors to get competitive pricing on every change. So the contractor is pricing them non-competitively, which leads to this idea that contractors will make a ton of money on variations. But what tends to happen, and what happens a lot, is that variations aren't handled properly. They don't get approved by the client. They don't get approved under the right circumstances, and contractors actually can lose money very easily. Let's give you a maths example to talk about this. So if you tendered a $1 million job with a 10% profit margin, you would have $100,000 profit. If you do $100,000 of extra work without getting an approved variation for it, you would lose your profit margin and you'd be doing the job for free. This is referred to as scope creep, additional work or uncontrolled changes to the project that don't result in extra money or time. On the other hand, if you do $100,000 of extra work, but you have a 20% margin on this, you actually boosted your overall profit margins on the project to 12%. The core issue here is you need to get the change approved under the right circumstances. So why are variations typically hard to get approved? Well, the first reason is clients have tight budgets. An extra dollar they pay you is a dollar they lose out of their profits for the project. On top of that, scope is often messy, complicated, and open to different interpretations. It really depends on how well you can articulate and explain the change, which is often very difficult to do. Third one is relationships matter on projects. You can't be claiming for everything. If you overclaim, you can quite easily damage your relationship with the client. So given this, how do you get variations approved under the right circumstances? Well, it really comes down to 2 key phases of the project: pre-contracts phase, so before we sign the contract, and then the delivery phase. So during the pre-contracts phase, we need to ensure we sign a contract with a crystal clear scope that aligns with what we priced. So first, when we're tendering the project, we want to submit quote and a letter of offer that articulates exactly what we're proposing to do and what we've allowed to do. So we want to review the drawings, specifications, and scope of work that was given to us. We want to note down any missing information and assumptions. When we submit our price to the client, if we haven't clarified any issues, we need to clearly articulate this in a letter of offer, exactly what we're allowing to do. Now, if our client is happy with our submission and our price, we'll generally go do some back and forward and negotiate with them prior to signing a contract. This means we want to capture in the scope of works in the contract we sign exactly what we're proposing to do. We want to make sure the scope is crystal clear, not ambiguous, so that when things change during delivery, all we have to do is refer to the scope of works and everyone will agree on the change. So the key things we want to make sure are correct are the scope of works document and the order of precedence in the contract. Once we sign a contract, we move into phase 2, which is project delivery. So even before a variation comes up, we need to make sure we have crystal clear understanding of the project scope and control over the project scope. This means we have good document control, we have good record keeping and site diaries. We also have cost tracking, so we're tracking every dollar we're spending and what we're doing. This is going to help us understand what's happening, what information we're relying on, and how and where we're spending money. With this information, it's incredibly easy to work out when something has changed. So when a variation comes up, you now need a process to follow. So there's two types of variations. There's variations requested, when a client requests us to do additional work, and then there's a variation claimed, where we claim we've had to do extra work. And the process we follow for each of them is slightly different. So a variation directed is where the client acknowledges there is a change and asks you to price it. Your job is to get approval under the right conditions. If the scope is unclear, offer to do it at cost plus or on day rates. But if the scope is clear, you want to price it conservatively. So remember, you're not procuring this competitively, so you don't have to go in incredibly late. You want to make sure you're giving them a price that you can stand behind, explain, that you're not being unfair and overclaiming, but you're giving them a price that articulates exactly what's changed and where all the costs come from. And you also want to make sure you're also including in this any additional overhead costs, like additional staff salaries or delays to the project. So that's a variation requested. A variation claimed is where the client doesn't automatically agree that you've had to do extra work and you're claiming that there's been some change to the scope and you need more time and money for it. So for example, if you've been delayed getting access to site. A variation claimed is slightly more challenging because you first need to prove the existence of a variation and then you need to submit a price for it. So these are the two key steps, and the critical thing is you want to break these steps up. So you first submit to the client and agree with the client the fact that there is a variation, but you don't show them any pricing first. Then you submit the pricing. The reason you break these steps up is because you don't want to scare the client with the costs. You first just want to prove the variation exists, then submit the pricing after. If you show the price initially and it's much higher than the client expects, they're going to push back much more aggressively. So with any variation claims, always focus on proving the variation exists first before providing any sort of pricing. For example, say you're working on a project where the client's doing the design and giving you the drawings. If there was a mistake in the drawings that required you to do rework, step one would be to show what this mistake is and explain the nature of the rework. Once you agree on the fact that there was a mistake in the drawings and it has caused you to do additional work, then step two would be to price it. With this method, once the client agrees to the change, the only thing they can argue is with how you've priced the change. What tends to happen is if you try to do step one and step two at once, because the client sees the pricing, they'll argue much more aggressively on the existence of the variation. This was an incredibly brief overview of how to manage variations. If you want a longer course on construction contract administration, then check out this video next.